Last week there was a front page story in the Telegraph where the health secretary is calling for schools to teach grit. This is a way to try and improve low attendance rates and deteriorating mental health in schools. But let me let you in on a little secret. There's already a powerful and evidence-based process that nurtures resilience in children. And you don't even need a classroom. Hi, I'm Lou, and the process I'm talking about, of course, is Forest School, which aims to support self-esteem and emotional resilience. That's its main focus. So here's the problem, right? We're living in a modern world where there's a crisis of mental health in adults and in children. In fact, in this article, they published the statistic that more than a fifth of 8 to 16-year-olds have a probable mental health problem, and that was in 2023, I think. So, you know, the scale of this issue of people suffering is massive. And that's going to affect all aspects of life, and of course schools included. So, you know, a fifth, that's, you know, if you've got 30 kids in a class of children, that's 6 children that you may have to work with. And of course schools have a focus on education. They might not necessarily have the resources or the training to understand in depth the needs of those various mental health difficulties. They might not understand how to support that fully. They may not just sheerly have the time or space or resources that would support those people appropriately. So, you know, this is quite, I mean, I find it quite heartbreaking and quite shocking that that so many children and adults, but focusing on children here, so many children are suffering to the extent that they're being diagnosed with anxiety disorders, depression, perhaps, you know, eating disorders, all sorts of things that would be under that category. And it makes me wonder what's gone wrong in our modern society. Why does an 8-year-old feel anxious to the extent that it's chronic anxiety or depressed? You know, what's happened to childhood so that an 8-year-old feels like that? And, you know, I wish we lived in a world where the decision makers and governments actually looked at the root causes. What's happened to childhood that has caused this? Because I think until you get down to the root, you won't actually make change in a long-term, meaningful way. But, however, this article, you know, is saying that the government is focusing on something perhaps a bit more measurable, a bit easier to measure, that is school attendance. And so they've linked the reducing attendance of pupils in schools to deteriorating mental health. Which kind of makes sense, doesn't it, really? If you're suffering mentally or physically, for that matter, you're not going to turn up to school, are you? Yeah, that kind of makes sense. And I suppose there should be some gratitude that they are looking at childhood mental health and hopefully allocating some meaningful resources to it. But in terms of what that might look like, I'm not sure what that might look at. I think they should invest in Forest School. Within the article, the Education Secretary says that by deploying NHS-led evidence-based interventions during children's formative years, we will not only halt the spiral towards crisis, but cultivate much-needed grit amongst the next generation, essential for academic success and life beyond school with all its ups and downs. Which is interesting, right? Because can you teach grit? Like, can you teach grit? Or do you actually have to provide an environment where that is nurtured within a person? You know, an environment that is diverse and unjudgmental and stimulating and accepting of a person and presents challenges and people can choose to engage with it how they want to. You know, an environment like out here, for example, I would say is a great way of stimulating grit. So in psychology, I believe that grit is defined as having a passion and the perseverance to follow a long-term goal. But I think that goes hand in hand with resilience, which is more to do with being able to bounce back after adversity. But I figure, if grit requires perseverance, in order to have that perseverance, you need resilience, right? Because you need to be able to bounce back when things don't go your way to be able to continue to persevere. So I kind of see grit and resilience very much, go hand in hand. So let's have a look at a theory about resilience. Psychologist Michael Rutter, sometimes called the father of child psychiatry, says that resilience isn't something children are born with or not. It's something that grows when children interact with protective factors that buffer them against stress. So it's the result of a dynamic interaction between risk factors, so things that are going to increase the chance of poor outcomes, and protective factors, things that are going to buffer against those risks. So these risk factors are things like being born into poverty, early childhood trauma, unstable families, low quality schooling, so sort of adversity, if you like, are forming risks. Whereas protective factors are things like having strong relationships, opportunities to solve problems cognitively and having success with those. So it's like a seesaw again. As forest school leaders, we know about balancing benefits and risks, don't we? Well, resilience is kind of a result of a similar kind of seesaw, but perhaps more to do with emotional risks rather than physical risks. So you're balancing that seesaw between risks and protective factors. So how does forest school fit in with this theory? Well, forest school, I would like to present my case, is a protective environment. So according to Rutter's theory, there are various aspects that create a protective environment, and I would say that forest school fits into all of these. So I want to break it down. I want to show you 5 different protective environment things under this theory and show you how forest school meets them. So the first of the protective factors is warm, trusting relationships. Forest School is all about relationships. In fact, the whole process of Forest School hinges on developing significant relationships between the Forest School practitioners and the learners that are attending, because without that you can't influence a person's self-esteem. So the practitioners are consciously aware of this, and there is a conscious effort, particularly at the beginning of a process, to connect deeply with the individuals that are coming out to Forest School, to get to really know them, to understand their needs, to understand their kind of gifts in the world, to support them in their play choices. We observe the learners, we get to really know them, we listen to them, we facilitate a non-judgmental community where everybody is recognised as a unique individual but equally valued. So through our consistent care and attunement with the learners, we build up those warm, trusting relationships. Also, a big shout out that I would like to argue that you can develop trusting, warm relationships with things that are also not human. So being out in nature and connecting deeply with the other beings, the trees, the caterpillars, the birds, taking notice, building up that relationship. Because forest school is long term, you go out week after week after week, you will get to know the individual beings that live in that space, so you can develop quite a strong connection. And although they're not human and don't necessarily converse in the way that we do in human terms, like, that tree that you've developed a connection with, it's always going to be there. You can always sit by it, and somehow like the energy can be calming, and through that connection, a sense of peace, a sense of kind of emotional regulation can happen through being out here in the woods. And there is research that proves that as well, about being here in the woods. A lot of the forest bathing research there's been done about how that helps people regulate and reduce stress. So the second of the protective factors is autonomy and responsibility. Forest School is play-based, it is learner-led, it is about finding out your own intrinsic motivation, what you enjoy, what you want to develop in yourself and grow. It's about making choices and initiating that. It's about following your own curiosities. Of course, the practitioners are there to support you in doing that, but ultimately it is about trying to get to a point of autonomy and kind of freely choosing, personally directing and intrinsically motivating, which is the definition of play. So Forest School trusts learners to make their own choices and understands that there are always needs that underpin people's choices and behaviours. And of course, in terms of responsibility, so there's that trust and choice through their play, but there are also like riskier type things that might take place at Forest School. I'm going to say that because it's like perceived risk. So risk taking, appropriate risk taking, is one of the principles of Forest School. So having support and permission to do things like light fires and cook your snack on it, or to use tools to whittle up a bow and arrow or whatever it is that you want to make. There is that level of responsibility and understanding about taking risks in a kind of managed way, a guided way. And it's through this autonomy and responsibility that we find a sense of purpose in the world. So, you know, I can see totally how that ties in with resilience and emotional well-being, because if you feel that you have control and choice over your life and that you're able to pursue your curiosities and gifts, you're going to feel a sense of purpose. And of course, that's going to improve your emotional well-being. So the third of the protective factors is a sense of mastery. So again, play provides that sense of mastery, and play in nature over long term, which is what Forest School is. We can come back and we can revisit things, so we can try things out, we can practice them. If it doesn't kind of go how we want it to go, we can review, we can reflect, we can try again, we can go through different weather conditions, through different seasons, and see how things change or interact in different environmental conditions. So this long-term repetitive pattern of Forest School enables us to master both our skills, but also master our environment. And I don't mean in like a mean, nasty way, I've conquered the environment, but I mean like as in terms of our interactions and our place within it, understanding how to be in the woods. You know, sometimes when people first come to the woods, they look quite uncomfortable. They don't know really what to do or how to play, or even like where to sit, or how things work in the woods, because they're perhaps not got that background or experience. So it takes time and little steps, little increments to gain a sense of mastery. Risky play, which I mentioned already, but that is also crucial for mastery. It's through risky play that we kind of conquer our fears of perhaps things that we previously were nervous about doing, and then we get to a point where we're able to do it. Like, say we're trying to climb a tree or something, and in the first few weeks of Forest School we're like, no, actually I'm not comfortable with doing that, I don't do it. But then over the weeks you watch other children doing it, perhaps you've already developed some of your kind of physical coordination skills through doing other activities, and then over time you decide to do it. So it's that conquering of what you couldn't do previously in your risky play that gives you a sense of mastery over kind of your own capabilities and your own kind of choices, I suppose. So again, Forest School, we've got the natural environment that facilitates mastery, and then there's also, of course, all the outdoor skills like fire lighting and rigging hammocks or rigging tarps. There's all those kind of skill-based things as well that we might do as well, that get practiced. And for example, at the end of the day, if you can make yourself a shelter, cook yourself a dinner, sleep overnight in the woods, that gives you quite a sense of mastery that you're okay out here. Protective factor 4 is peer connection. So Forest School is a community, and we co-create that with the learners. So the practitioners are on a much more kind of even keel with the learners. It's not like a hierarchy where the adults are in charge kind of thing. It's much more kind of even and inclusive in terms of how we work. So there may be things, you know, like circles and things where everybody's voice is listened to, and it's about that, how things can evolve, how culture and community can evolve over time. Again, you can't do this in just a one-off. It has to be done over time. But as trust and connection build, then the culture and the community gets co-created. So peers connect very deeply with each other. I would argue that being out here in the woods is a great leveler, right? And you see the true nature of a person out here because you're cutting through all the bullshit, yeah, that happens indoor the classrooms, or particularly on the virtual world. You know, anyone could be anything online because you don't even necessarily see the person. You know, you can make up all sorts of crap online, but out here in the woods we see the real you because you're physically here in the woods doing what you're doing. You can't really hide behind facades out here, so it's really authentic and people connect deeply. And because Forest School is a non-judgmental community, okay is okay, right? We're not expecting everyone to be perfect at everything. It's very real, it's very raw, it's very human, and because of that, people start to trust each other. They start to relax and, you know, being okay at expressing themselves authentically with each other. So I would say, like, yeah, Forest School, playing in nature is the best way to connect with your peers in an authentic, meaningful way. So the final one, number 5 of the protective factors, is cognitive skills like self-regulation and problem-solving type skills. So Forest School is real. It's real life, and there's problems in real life, you know, well, perceived problems, I suppose. You know, might be chucking it down with rain and we're all getting wet, so, you know, there's a problem to solve. What are we going to do? We've got a tarp and some rope. Perhaps we could rig a shelter. All right, how are we going to do it? Where are we going to attach the rope? What knots are we going to use? How are we going to tension it? Can you hold that bit? You know, because it's real, you don't have to contrive like problems. There are problems to sort out and to work through, although I don't necessarily mean, you know, raining's necessarily a problem, but, you know, there are challenges to overcome out here, and you get that sense of camaraderie when you're with a group of people and you're overcoming challenges as well. So that ties into the last one about peer connection. So because it's real, you don't have to wait for feedback, right? If you're rigging that shelter and all the water is pooling in one particular place, right, you can see it immediately, so you know that you have to adapt things, maybe slightly tension this rope or add a guy line there and change that, and you see the results of those decision making. It's not like you have to wait for someone to mark your work or give you feedback to be able to problem solve. It's the environment gives you all the feedback you need to be able to solve the problems yourself in a kind of autonomous way. And again, because we're in a long-term process, we can allow repetition. So if things don't work out the first time, it's raining and we've rigged a shelter and it's like a bit of, you know, basically just wrapping the tarp around us to keep dry, been there, you know, that's all right, because, you know, as the weeks go on, it's going to rain more, so we get a chance to practice our shelter building, you know, repeatedly, so that we kind of gain that sense of mastery that we've already talked about. In terms of like self-regulation as well, there is so much research out there about how nature soothes us and helps us regulate, from things like the colour green, and being out here reduces cortisol levels. That's one of the stress hormones in our brains. There's like what do you call them? Forgotten the proper name for them, but like the plant, hormones that come out of the leaves that you kind of you smell. They come in through your nose, and they create calm and connection as well. Maybe have to look that one up. There's lots of research out there that shows how being in nature helps us to regulate our emotions. Something else worth just mentioning is that sensory integration is the foundation of being able to emotionally regulate. So being out here in this diverse, multi-sensory environment is a great way of helping our senses to integrate. Through exposure, fundamentally, that the sounds I hear, the colours that I see, the textures I can feel, everything is kind of coming into my brain, and that experience is helping me integrate those sensory experiences. So that is a foundation for emotional regulation. So at Forest School, we might even try to supercharge that a bit by doing various sensory kind of awareness games or core routines of nature connection. They're very sensory as well, to kind of draw attention and focus to exploring the world in a multi-sensory way. So yeah, self-regulation. Nature is a brilliant place to help us regulate as well. So I think we're hitting all 5 here of the protective factors. We are in a protective environment according to Rutter's theory. And I mean, just point out, like, Forest School isn't all fluffy rainbows and unicorns as well, right? It's not a soft thing, yeah? It can be really quite tough and real life, and it's hard sometimes, if it's really, really cold. We go out all year round, yeah? It could be really, really cold, or you're sopping wet, or you're up to your knees in mud every week because the site's waterlogged, or there are challenges out here, environmental challenges. Also, there are challenges within maybe some of the experiences we provide. It's pouring with rain, you can't get the fire lit, it's more challenging. But these challenges are very natural. They're part of the natural course of the experience. They're not contrived. And they're also, you can quite easily see the purpose of trying to overcome them. If you're cold and wet and you want your hot chocolate, persevering to get the fire lit seems a very obvious kind of goal and purpose. So in terms of kind of a natural flow of resilience or perseverance, just happens because there's a motivation for it out here. And Forest School is holistic as well. It nurtures holistic growth, holistic development and growth. And so I would say it taps in to all types of resilience as well. It helps people become physically resilient by just sheerly being out here, walking in the woods and in all weathers and all that, but also emotionally resilient and spiritually resilient. It covers all aspects of a person and supports them to grow holistically. So, should we be teaching grit? I mean, the article makes a good point. Grit and resilience matter for people's well-being and life chances. They are crucial to emotional well-being. But what if, instead of trying to teach grit, we nurture it through connection and nature and risk-taking and play? Forest School does this beautifully. So let's help others see its value in transforming lives. So, do you believe that resilience is all about relationships and nature and self-discovery rather than just forcing toughness? Let me know in the comment sections below. Perhaps you've got cool stories of how children you've worked with have built their resilience and grit at Forest School. If you've enjoyed this video, do give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel so you can join us in the woods again next time. And thanks for watching. Get outside to nurture grit. With resilience, we can bounce back quick. Forest School is what we need so we can improve mental well-being when we head to the trees.